Hi, everyone. Welcome to our family webinar series. My name is Loyola Cicero. I'm the Assistant Director for New Student and Family Programs. And this webinar series is new, but is topic selected by families for families. So we're really excited to get it off the ground this semester. Um, Really quick, we're just going to turn it over to Byrne, our Associate Director of Residence Life and Housing, to present, and then I will manage the Q&A box at the bottom. If you put a question in there, I will either answer it or I'll keep it for the end for Byrne to answer in a Q&A section. So with that, Byrne, take it away.
Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. It's great to spend a little time with you this evening. As Laura said, my name is Byrne Smith. I use the she series of pronouns, and I am the Associate Director for Housing Operations. So, within our office, within Residence Life and Housing, I am the person that manages a lot of the process-oriented pieces that our students navigate. So, some of that being, housing assignments and some of those types of things, but also move-in processes and some other items that your students are hopefully quite familiar with. So we're hoping to spend a little bit of time just going over the housing application and housing selection process. And to give you a little bit of a heads up, if any of your students end up going to one of our info sessions, this information is going to be pretty similar to what I share um, with the students during those sessions. So hoping to be able to give a brief overview of what the students will experience through that process, as well as just a highlight of a few deadlines that I would love some support from our families and support folks to make sure our students are aware of and meeting those deadlines. So just the first thing we're to do is quick off, just a quick timeline overview to kind of talk through what this process looks like. So in early February, which is now, the housing application has opened. So that opened actually a few days ago. Your students should have received emails about that. And that is where students will do their residency intent as well as form a roommate group through that time period. During February, we're hosting a bunch of different programs related to the housing selection process. I'm wrapping up information sessions tomorrow, or I'm sorry, Thursday. We had a few last week. Then we will also be hosting roommate socials, where if students maybe are looking for some additional folks to join their roommate group, or particularly we have a lot of our folks who are studying abroad. A lot of times will come and participate in this because maybe they are looking for someone to quote unquote swap out with them for the semester that maybe they're going abroad. They're looking for another person to kind of do that swap. And then we'll also be doing some room tours for some of our buildings where our sophomores through seniors will live, in case maybe some residents have not necessarily checked out some of those buildings so that they know a little bit of what to expect in terms of a setup. If you remember no other deadlines from this or no other dates that I talk about, the biggest deadline that we are kind of working with on this is February 24th, and that is when students will need to submit their residency intent by. So actually all students, whether they plan to live on campus or off campus, submit their residency intent so that so the institution knows what their plans are for the following year, and then they'll receive some information kind of based on that selection for their next steps in the process. And then lastly, some of our selection days, those will be happening after spring break. And they will be happening, I believe it's the 9th through the 18th. And so that will kind of look like different class years going different days as they kind of navigate through that process with our rising seniors going first and our rising sophomores wrapping up the process. So this is just a very, I'm a visual person, so this is a graphic that students have received in some of the emails, and it should also be listed in the portal. So this just gives a general kind of overview of, again, all of those programs we have, all of the dates for selection days, as well as just some quick process notes. So this is a great reference point for students as they are hopefully trying to remember some of the days of this process. So next, I just want to talk a little bit about the residency intent and what students will be asked during that process. So when students are completing that residency intent, they're going to be asked to review some information that they have submitted previously to the institution. So things like their contact information, emergency contact information, those are all items that we want to make sure we keep up to date. And so there's directions on if any of that information is out of date, how to update those. Students will select whether they plan to live on campus or off campus. Students who choose to live off campus will have some additional questions of, if they're studying abroad in the fall, that is one of the options if you are living off campus, and then we'll ask some follow-up questions about that as part of that. As I mentioned, the deadline to submit the residency intent is February 24th at 11:59 p.m. For any student who is intending to live on campus, if they do not submit their intent by this deadline, they will not be able to receive a lottery time or be able to join a roommate group. My turnaround time to get lottery times out is pretty fast, and so that's why we have a pretty hard and fast deadline of when they need to submit that by. So the next piece of the process for folks who are living on campus is the housing contract. And so one thing that I can always use a little bit of support in terms of messaging on is it's really important that students read the contract. We tend to get a lot of questions throughout the year or some misunderstandings about some of the processes that we talk about in the contract, where students kind of a lot of times will tell us, like, I didn't know that was part of what I signed. And so really making sure that your student is taking a look at that. It's not the longest document, it's not the shortest document either, but some of the information is a little bit more informational in terms of when our opening days are, closing dates, pieces like that. But then also there are pieces of that where students are agreeing not only to the terms of this contract, but also to abide by the community standards. And so we leave some of that in there. And then I think one thing that I think sometimes is unfortunately a common misconception we get from students is that even if they intend to live on campus and they sign the contract, if they decide they want to live off campus at a later date, so maybe over the summer they decide they want to live locally in Baltimore, that it's automatic that they can get out of this housing contract, which is not factual. So anybody who does want to cancel must submit a cancellation request, and that goes through a review process. And so that is not an automatic approval, and there are certain reasons listed in the contract of why we would approve someone. Of course, if someone is taking a leave or withdrawing some of those pieces, of course, those folks will be able to, of course, cancel their contracts, but this is more for students who are staying here at Loyola but have decided maybe they want to live off campus. There are only specific reasons that we would allow someone to cancel their contract. So anything you can do to, have your students make sure that they are reviewing this information would be very helpful. This document is also already available for next year on our website in the forms and documents page. So if that's something that you wanted to take a look at as well, that information is available. So the next step of the process, while we do not necessarily manage meal plans, we are the way that a student does tell the institution what meal plan they are looking for. So all residents who live on campus are required to have a meal plan, and options in terms of what meal plans are available to a student is based on their class year. So our freshmen and sophomores are all required to have our 21 meal a week plan, but then juniors and seniors, depending on class year, there are a few additional options that they can choose from. Those options have not changed from this current year to next year. And so all of the information about those is available on the website. And our off-campus students can also choose to opt into a meal plan as well. All right, so that's kind of the gist of sort of what students will tell us through that process. And then there are a few optional experiences that our students can choose through the application. And so those are our intentional living communities and then as well as all gender housing. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of a heads up about what those look like or what those communities are. And so typically for our intentional living communities, those are communities that are thematic in some way in terms of the community that they're trying to build, and those are anchored to a specific residence hall. However, whereas all gender housing is something any student can opt into. However, everyone in their roommate group needs to have opted into that, and that means that students could be spread across campus. So we have students in all gender housing in pretty much every building across campus. And that is kind of like they move as a unit in terms of the community they're building. And then they do receive some additional outreach from our office in terms of additional opportunities to connect. So just wanted to review some of those options. So the first one we have is Greyhound Haven House. And so this is a community that is directly looking to support students who are interested in equity, diversity, and inclusion, and how that growth kind of navigates through their college experience. I will name a lot of, we do tend to have a lot of students of color who tend to opt into this experience. And so this is a goal is to make sure that there is sort of that welcome and safe community in that space for anybody. And so this group will be housed in Lang Court, and there are a couple of different unit types within that. Our second group is substance-free housing. So for any of our sophomores, juniors, and seniors, we do offer the opportunity for students who are to live in community with other students who are intentionally choosing a substance-free lifestyle. And so that is students who are looking to have roommates who are substance-free, as well as this will be a floor or two in a specific building where everybody has opted in and agreed to not use or have any substances in their spaces. And so this community will be in Dorothy Day next year, and there are 6-person apartments in there. And then last one, we are working towards building this community. This current academic year is the first time we offered this, but we are hoping to have continue our transfer living community. And so for the students who are incoming transfers will be some of the folks who will live in this community. However, we are also looking for some current students who have transferred into Loyola at some point during their college experience to build some connections with some incoming students who will be new transfers for the 26-27 academic year. And so this community will be in Newman Towers. And each of these intentional living communities has a specific cap on them, and about 40 residents, give or take, will be able to opt into those experiences. And then lastly, as I mentioned, all gender housing. So all gender housing is a housing option really that's looking to support members of the LGBTQ plus community. So this community tends to be a space where, again, we're looking for that openness and connection, a respectful community to folks of maybe varying gender identities or sexual orientations. And so that could mean that folks of different genders are living in a unit together. And that is something that, again, students will kind of go through the process. This is something they can opt into if they would like. And then their whole roommate group would have to opt into that. And then also we have a what we call our all gender housing agreement. So by choosing to live in this style of community, there are certain things that we are expecting from students in that. So they'll review and sign that as well. So just wanted to do a brief overview of those options if you hear your students talking about those. So as students navigate through the process, they will be able to go through either as a roommate group or as an individual. So that's a change we made for last academic year that went fairly well last year, and we're going to continue that. So for our folks who choose to go through essentially as an individual, they don't necessarily have a roommate group, they will also be assigned a lottery time. And so the way that this works is for each class year, there will be a section of time where some of our groups will go. So they will choose first, and then our individuals will kind of hopefully fill in some of the spaces where maybe that are left available into different apartments. And so with that, we do tend to encourage folks to choose vacant space in a unit that already has some other folks in it, because if they start a full brand new unit on their own, we are likely going to consolidate them into one of those other units. So if that is available in terms of maybe there is a 4-person apartment with only 3 people in it, we would suggest a student chooses that space. They will be able to see who is already listed as, if there are students assigned, they will be able to see who is assigned in that space and check to see if there's some compatibility in some of those pieces as they are navigating that selection process. And so the second way that folks go through this is as a roommate group. And folks will be able to form groups in any size from 2 to 8. And so just some things that I tell students to kind of consider as they're navigating that in terms of there could be a few different scenarios that play out when they get to their lottery time based on their group size. So if a roommate group doesn't fill an entire unit, another individual or another group that could fit into that unit may choose the space at a later time. Or it could be that maybe right after we finish room selection, there isn't anybody maybe in the last vacant space of that unit, but we will likely fill that over the summer with maybe a transfer student, or we do end up having some students who change assignments for a variety of reasons over the summer. The second piece of that is if there is not a unit large enough for their entire group, the group leader will still place every group member that has decided to be in that group. So one of the examples I like to give is if there is a group of eight, but there are no eight-person units, the group leader would still place all eight individuals across, sometimes maybe that would be two four-person units, or kind of navigating based on what's available in the system at that time. As students go through that process to kind of create those roommate groups, they will need to sort of like accept each other's requests. So someone will be the group leader, and then the other folks will be able to join that group. But it is basically a kind of like mutual request situation. So I always like to tell students it's kind of like having a private social media account. You are sending a follow request and someone is following you back. Same idea here with these roommate group requests. Roommate groups will be, again, as I mentioned, assigned lottery times prior to individuals in their class year, and then all members of the group will have the same lottery time, but only one person will log in at that lottery time to actually select housing. So just kind of a very brief overview of selection days, because this is a little bit out. But kind of what this looks like the day of is a group leader or individual will log into the portal at their assigned lottery times. The person who is selecting will search for units available in the designated buildings that they're eligible to live in for their lottery during their lottery time window. And then they will select a space for themselves and roommates, if applicable, and place them into bed spaces. So they essentially, it kind of is supposed to mimic a little bit like an online shopping situation. So they're going to sort of like add rooms to their cart, and then they will actually physically assign like, Burr, if I'm the group leader and Laura is my roommate, I would assign myself to maybe bedroom A, space one, and I would then assign Laura to bedroom A, space two, and then the rest of our roommates in the roommate group. Some things that I really make sure to talk to students about is really making sure they have multiple plans. Just because they are super interested in living in a certain community or a certain room type does not necessarily mean that will be available at that time. So our most common room types available in terms of number, like group size across campus are we tend to have the most four-person units and six-person units. Again, we do have eight-person units and two-person units, but those are only in specific buildings and there are less of those across campus. And then I also really make sure to tell students that it's really important that they actually talk as a roommate group about some of the different scenarios that they could get into as the person who is selecting goes through that process. And so really making sure that everyone is on the same page about like, okay, if our top choice is Ronner Village, but there's nothing left in that community, where are some additional options that we would want to live as a group? Or if we're, a group of six and by the time we get to our time, there's no six-person units left. Kind of like what are the different strategies or things that we might want to do in terms of how to select housing. So those are definitely the big important things to think about as they prepare for selection day. And one thing to note about Selection Day is the main change, or really the only change we've made for this year, is that we have changed when our lottery times will be. So in past years, they have been sort of like all the seniors will select on a specific day and go kind of like throughout the whole day. So maybe starting at like 10 a.m. And go till 5 or 6 in the evening. We tended to have some folks who would reach out for a variety of reasons of, no one in their group was available at a certain time because of classes and stuff like that. So we have shifted that to be now we are doing less people will select each day, but we will be starting in the evenings. So our goal right now, depending on numbers, we're going to try and start around 6 p.m. So that we can kind of hopefully have less conflicts with those lottery times as we do definitely have students who are in night classes, but it's less likely that every single person in the group would have the same night class time. And so, a major question we get from students is, what buildings am I able to live in? So, for our juniors and seniors, they're eligible for most buildings across campus. Of course, not our first year halls. And then also, our juniors and seniors would not be able to live in Campion Hall. Campion is designated as a sophomore specific building, and we are building out a kind of like sophomore experience with some of our programming and some of those pieces that then is kind of like anchored to Campion. But based on numbers, we can't fit our entire sophomore class in Campion. So the goal this year would be to have our sophomore class split between a rising sophomore class split between Campion and then some spots in Newman. And so one of the things that I had been trying to do this year is to give a little bit of information of sort of like as a breakdown where our current population is living in terms of which buildings lean more senior, which buildings lean more junior in that. So this is just a basically just a spreadsheet that I already just had going based on our occupancy. And so as you can see, there are a couple of buildings that really do lean a lot more senior specific. And so particularly Ronner Village is almost entirely seniors. Our buildings and gardens, which is Avila, Bellarmine, Claver, and Dorothy Day, tend to be quite heavily leaning to seniors. And then Macaulay as well. And so that Macaulay is over on the east side of campus, over closer to the library. And so that tends to be, again, a lot of seniors. As you can note in Campion, that is almost entirely sophomores, as I mentioned. And I put some asterisks there because the only folks who are living in that building who are juniors or seniors are actually RRAs or their roommates. Our RAs in those buildings have live in suites with other students that they can pull in as a roommate group. And then I have an asterisk next to the sophomores in Lang because those students did not go through the traditional housing selection processes like that. They are living in there because they have opted into an intentional living community. So as you can, and then our last group that is kind of pretty heavily, again, there's some spread across campus in terms of where our juniors live. A lot of our juniors do end up landing in Newman Towers. And then wanted to cover two specific situations that we just tend to get a lot of questions about. So always want to make sure to cover them at least a little bit. I won't go super in depth, but we'll do a brief overview of these two situations that are fairly common. So any of our students who are studying abroad, so current students who are abroad will receive communication about this process. And if a student is studying abroad in fall of 2026, then they will complete the application currently and tell us that they are living off campus and going abroad. And then when they are looking to return to campus, they will complete sort of like a secondary application to do their spring residency intent. And that typically takes place in November. And then those students will be assigned to an available bed space. One thing we tend to get questions about is, hey, we're a group of 5. Our 6th roommate is going abroad in the fall, and we want to have them live with us in the spring. We don't save spaces in those roommate groups. We just don't have the capacity to be able to do that across campus. And so those students, will tend to try and find maybe someone who can be there in the fall that they can swap out in for the spring if they can, or we'll work with them when that spring process happens to do our best to find a good spot for them based on their preferences. And then the other piece is our housing accommodations process. And so I always mention this. This is, again, the initial part of that process is not managed by our office. It's managed by Disability and Accessibility Services. But I work very closely with my partners over in that office to make sure that students who are approved for housing accommodation are able to be placed in a unit that meets their needs. And so those folks are actually manually assigned. So I'll get a list from DAS about who is approved, what their approval is, and then those students, if they want to, can form a roommate group, and we do our best to honor getting them into a space that will meet both their need and the size of the roommate group. But one thing that I like to mention is we don't have a lot of rooms that we would consider, like structurally speaking, a single occupancy room. And so there are only certain buildings that have that. And so we prioritize placing students who are approved for a single in a space that kind of already has that sort of structural single within the unit. We try and prioritize putting folks in those spaces as we navigate that placement process. And so our approved singles, as it currently stands, are in single occupancy rooms are in the current spaces. So Ronner Village, Ahern, Aquinas. And those three buildings, again, are on the east side of campus, closer to the library. And then we do have a very small number of units in both Campion and Newman. So those are our major spots where we place students who are have approved singles. Of course, there are other accommodations that students have. And then I again work closely with someone over in disability and accessibility services to figure out what unit type or number of roommates, some of those kinds of things are best to place them in based on that accommodation that they have. Okay, I talk very fast, so I went through that fairly quickly, but I know folks tend to have a lot of questions about this housing process. So I think Laura has been moderating, if you will, our Q&A. So happy to answer any questions that have come in through there.
Yes, and we actually only have one so far.
Okay, but if you
Yes,
have more questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box.
absolutely. So, someone asked if you could kind of go over a little bit again how if someone is going abroad in the spring, if it's a
Mhm.
student's responsibility to find a new roommate to cover that time period.
No, it's not. So essentially, if a student is going abroad in the spring, they will go through this process, basically the same way they would if they were going to be here all year. So they will say that they are staying on campus for this semester, and then once we get the approved list from Study Abroad, we will actually then go and cancel their spring housing once we get that information. But it's not their responsibility necessarily to find someone. However, a lot of roommate groups are looking to try and do that so that they know the person who's coming in the spring. But that is absolutely not required of them. That just could mean that we will place someone there who maybe is returning from abroad and hopefully has good compatibility with the rest of the folks in that space.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah.
Another one just came in. Can a rising sophomore roommate include one rising junior that is not an RA?
Rising sophomore roommate group. Can they have a
Rising
junior?
sophomore roommate and a rising junior that's not an RA.
Yes. So as of now, students, sophomores, juniors, and seniors can choose to have mixed roommate groups. That just might look a little different in terms of how they will go through that process. Actually, if a primarily rising sophomore group has a rising junior in it, that actually can kind of help, if you will, a little bit of when they get to select. They likely will get to select a little bit early.
There you go. Another one came in. If you're placed in housing that has a full kitchen as a sophomore, are you still required to do the 21 meal plan per week?
Yes. So actually, all of our communities from sophomore through senior do have a kitchen in unit, but it is still required for the 21 meals a week for our rising sophomore population.
Gotcha. And you can change those as they go through SAS or no?
So our first years and second years are not able to change that.
Gotcha.
However, we do have for the students who are able to choose from a variety of meal plans. If they choose something now and realize it's not really what they're looking for, they actually can do that through room res, which is where the housing application and all of our other basically housing related things happen. But there is a pretty strict cutoff date of like the first Sunday of classes, like after the academic year starts. So that form will be open for a period of time if students decide okay, I decided the 14 meals a week was what I was looking for, but now that I think about it, I'm looking for the junior points plan, for example. They'd be able to make that change on their own, and then our system talks to SAS basically to update their bill.
Gotcha. Another one about sophomores.
Hmm.
Do all sophomore units have kitchens?
Yes.
Okay, easy answer.
Yep.
And then, okay, so our first, ooh, welcome to Loyola. The experience for choosing or being assigned housing as a first year student. Very different. Burn, take it
Very.
away.
Yes, definitely a different process. So any of our first year students will go through some similar pieces of this process. So they will still do their residency intent. They just won't actually be selecting their unit the way that our sophomores through seniors do. So our students, first year students who go through, will do the residency intent, select their meal plan, which is really they'll just confirm and see that they're having the 21 meals a week meal plan. There's some other pieces of that process where they'll be asked if they want to get renter's insurance through one of our partners, some other pieces there. And then our incoming first years are only able to make a roommate group of two. So they're only able to request a direct roommate. And then I basically let the system do its magic to place folks, hopefully, or based on their roommate profiles, into roommate pairs if students decide not to request a roommate. And that's kind of how we navigate placing them in housing. It's fairly random, or will be fairly random next year as we navigate through that process in terms of what building they'll end up living in.
Thank you.
Mhm.
How are bedrooms assigned within the apartments?
For our returning students, they are able to decide that for themselves. So they should figure out, if they're a group of six, they should know who wants to be direct roommates with who. And then the person who is their group leader will make that assignment.
Gotcha. Okay. We have no currently coming in, so I have a question for you.
Yeah,
Um,
sure, Laura.
what is the best way for families to support their students through this process?
Yeah, I would say a big piece of this is there's a lot of information as part of this process, so really encouraging your students to slow down and read the portal. There's not a rush necessarily to get the intent in like right now. It went out earlier this week, but making sure students know the deadline, are making sure that they're reading their emails and some of those kinds of things about some of this coming out. And then I think the other piece is not every student is going to get what they want in terms of not every student's going to be able to get their first choice of what building they want to live in. And so I think really kind of trying to, and I think a lot of the communication that we do is really trying to get students to kind of manage their expectations around that. And that's why I always say, make sure you have a few plans or a few buildings in mind that you would want to live in. And so really kind of having some of those conversations with, if they don't get what they want or, their first choice, that there are still good choices in a lot of our buildings. That again, just some of those communities feel like a little bit different, but at the same time, there is still a community feel in all of our housing communities. And then I think also something I always suggest to folks is really thinking about their living style and how that living style pairs up with their friends. Not every friend is going to be a great roommate. So you might be besties, but you might have opposite sleeping schedules or very different expectations around what does clean and organized mean to you. And so I think that would be the other piece is really reflecting on what your student is looking for in their roommate match. And just because someone is your best friend does not mean that they are going to be your best friend slash roommate, et cetera. And so really kind of thinking through that as they are sort of thinking through forming that roommate group.
Thanks. I got
Mhm.
some more for you now.
Great.
I'm glad that these are prompting other ones.
Yeah, great.
Um, okay, so we have a family member asking about the alert system for emergencies on campus, which they've already signed up for. Awesome, we love to hear it.
Yep.
But they haven't gotten any, although
Okay.
they want to know if their student is in a specific hall and something happens
Mhm.
in that hall,
Sure.
would a specific alert go to them?
So, depending on the situation, that might not go through the emergency alert. The emergency alert system is run by public safety. And so that typically is something that they are alerting everyone in the campus community. So I will name as an employee, I get those. So I'm trying to think. We obviously got ones for snow closures, and we actually recently this semester there was a car accident which did not involve any Loyola folks, but was adjacent to campus, and so there have been times where even we have gotten some alerts for things happening in like the community just surrounding campus, but those are really intended to be full campus-wide alerts. If there is something happening to a specific hall, there are times where actually Residence Life and Housing is sending some of that out. So unfortunately, we had a bit of a flood over the winter break this year. Very much not ideal. But our team, so Residence Life and Housing in coordination with our Dean of Students office, we were sending out communication to the specific impacted students. So something like that happened in a particular building, whether it's a facilities concern or something like that, that would be something that would kind of be depending on the situation, would depend on who would send that out. So sometimes it is from the Residence Life and Housing team or someone else kind of in the student development division. But again, those larger campus-wide things are the one things that are typically going to come through that emergency alert system.
Gotcha, thank you.
Mhm.
For first year early accepted students, is
Yeah.
their process any different?
Ooh, someone is getting some good info. Um, the plan is yes, but I don't have all of my I's dotted and my T's crossed for approvals of exactly what that's going to look like for our early admit students. The answer is likely that will look a little bit different for them as they're coming in, but not necessarily fully shareable right now.
Gotcha. Good way of putting it.
Thanks.
I'm going to go to the other one that also refers to first year students. So someone asked, is there a walkthrough scheduled for rising students to assess preferred housing? Um,
Mm.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So we will have some opportunities for students. So if you've ever been to a campus tour, there are a couple of showrooms that folks see, either in Thea Bowman, or I think it's Hammerman. But to be honest, Butler and Hammerman are the same in my brain because they are very similar buildings. So it's in one of those two. So those are rooms that you may have already seen if you visited campus. However, during orientation, we do show those two rooms again, as well as we'll have an opportunity to see our other first year housing options. I will name students are not going to be able to preference what community they want to live in as part of that application for incoming first year students. It will be a random assignment based on again, there's not going to be a preference in terms of you got your application in first, so you get a certain building. It will be a randomly kind of assigned through that process. But if students do request a roommate, we will be able to honor those requests in most cases.
Thank you. I have two about the lottery.
Sure.
So first is how long does a lottery time slot last before it goes to the next person?
So each lottery time slot is actually multiple folks will be going at once. So it kind of depends for different things. We are actually planning to extend that lottery. They typically used to only be like 15 or 20 minutes. I was asked to actually extend those so that once someone has their lottery time, that they will have it for at least 24 hours. So they would still be able to access and log into the portal even if their lottery time has passed to be able to go. That could just mean if, of course, they log in 3 hours after their lottery time, they might not see the same options that they would see if they logged on at the beginning of that.
Check their email. They
Yeah,
need to check their email.
yes. Let's
The
say the
other
lottery
lot,
email, I get a pretty high read rate on that one. People are usually waiting for that one.
they do. Every subject, my email's gonna be lottery now. The other lottery question was, does it start with seniors and work the way down?
Yes. So essentially, kind of the way it works is our seniors who are in groups will go first. Then our seniors who are going through the process individually will go after that. And then junior groups, junior individuals, sophomore groups, sophomore individuals.
Gotcha. If a student is registered as an individual by February 24th, can they join a roommate group before selection day?
They sure can. So those roommate pages will be available for them to make changes throughout that time. So they can definitely do that. And then also one of the huge wins for me when we decided to make this that they could edit that throughout that time is if they need to switch who their group leader is, they can also log into the portal and shift who the group leader is.
Gotcha. And another one, are there any walkthroughs of Campion or Newman?
Yes, so that is part of our room tours. And so those will be happening on the 24th and 25th of February. So right before spring break, we will have a couple of rooms to show in each of those buildings. We're going to try and highlight a couple of different room types if we can.
Awesome. Great. So thank you for sharing that contact information. If you have further questions, you can reach out to residencelife@loyola.com.edu.
Ooh, I didn't know we were .com.
Yeah. No, edu is way more.
Yeah.
But that is it for tonight. So I appreciate you all for joining our webinar series in general. Someone said great job. Good job, Bern.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate your time and any support you can offer to your students throughout this process.
Yes, and now that you all have the same information they're going to, you can remind them of all those deadlines to make Loyola's staff's lives easier. But that is it for tonight. Thank you for joining. We hope you got a lot out of it. And we hope you join us again on Wednesday, March 11th at 7 p.m. to hear from the Career Center, which was the highest asked for one, most highly requested. So thank you. You can register for that on Campus ESP and have a great rest of your night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.